It had been one of those evenings where I was glad to be alone. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums like a blanket, wrapping around you after a long day. I had dinner dishes drying on the counter, a half-finished book on the coffee table, and the hum of the fridge was the only sound. Outside, the streetlights glowed faintly through the blinds, casting stripes of gold across the living room carpet. I was halfway through a rerun on TV when the knock came. Sharp, fast, almost urgent. It startled me. Nobody ever came by unannounced. For a moment I just sat there, remote in hand, debating if I'd imagined it. Then it came again, harder this time. I pulled myself up with a sigh and padded to the door. When I opened it, everything about my night shifted. Dylan stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, sweatshirt stretched at the seams like he'd yanked it on in a hurry. His hair was messy, sticking up at odd angles, and his eyes carried the kind of weariness that went deeper than a long day. Still, even with the shadows under his eyes, he managed a crooked grin. The same grin he'd used 1,000 times to get away with just about anything. "Hey," he said, voice low but casual, like he wasn't standing on my doorstep looking like his world had cracked open. "Can I crash here for a while?" I blinked. "Crash here?" "Yeah." He shifted the strap of his bag higher, avoiding my gaze. "Got kicked out. Long story. Don't feel like telling it right now." My brows shot up. "Kicked out?" The words left me half teasing, half concerned. "Something like that," he muttered, glancing down the hallway as if someone might be watching. "They said they'd had enough. Told me to pack my stuff and go." I leaned against the doorframe, studying him. Dylan wasn't the type to show embarrassment. He was the guy who could walk into a room and act like he owned it. But the way his jaw tightened, the way he gripped that backpack strap a little too hard, told me this wasn't a performance. He was hurt, even if he'd never admit it. I opened the door wider. "Come in." His relief flickered quickly across his face before he masked it with another grin. He stepped inside without hesitation, tossing the backpack onto the hallway floor like it weighed 100 pounds. The scent of cold night air clung to him, mixed with something faintly like sweat and soap. Familiar. "Thanks, man. I owe you," he said, his tone breezy as he kicked off his shoes. "Promise I won't be a problem." I almost laughed. Dylan never made promises he could keep, but I didn't call him out. Instead, I shrugged, trying to act indifferent, like this was no big deal. "Stay as long as you need. Couch pulls out. Sheets are in the closet." He shot me that grin again. Exhausted, a little sheepish, but still carrying that confident edge. "You're a lifesaver." I waved him off, though inside my chest something twisted. Dylan had always been chaos wrapped in charm. I'd known him for years, enough to understand that when he walked through your door, he didn't just bring himself. He brought noise, laughter, bad ideas, and sometimes trouble. But as I watched him sink onto the couch like it already belonged to him, backpack forgotten by the door, I felt something else too. A pulse of curiosity. Pull I couldn't name out loud. He stretched, arms wide across the back of the cushions, and let out a sigh that sounded more like surrender than comfort. "Man, I didn't realize how much I needed to just sit down." I nodded slowly. "Rough night. Rough couple of weeks," he corrected, rubbing the back of his neck. Then, as if deciding he'd said too much, he smirked. "But hey, not your problem." I caught myself smiling despite the situation. Dylan had a way of taking whatever storm he carried and making it look like a light drizzle. He was exhausted, maybe even embarrassed, but he'd still flash that grin and pretend everything was under control. And I had to pretend too. Pretend that my stomach didn't flip when he looked at me, that my mind wasn't already racing with questions I shouldn't ask. Why was he kicked out? What had pushed his friends past the point of no return? And more than that, why did I feel this strange mix of protectiveness and anticipation? Like his chaos might change something in my life too. He yawned, long and unguarded, before leaning back with his eyes half closed. "Seriously, Aaron, thanks. I'll figure things out. But for now, just need a place to land." I nodded again, quietly. "You've got it." As the TV hummed in the background and the city buzzed faintly outside, The quiet of my apartment wasn't quite the same anymore. Dylan had brought his storm to my doorstep, and I had let it in. And though I told myself I was just being a good friend, I knew deep down it was more complicated than that. By the next morning, curiosity had me pacing. Dylan had slept late, sprawled on the pull-out couch like it was his natural habitat. He snored lightly, one arm draped over his face, the other dangling off the side. The backpack he'd dropped by the door hadn't moved. I made coffee, but even that bitter warmth didn't quiet the questions buzzing in my head. Dylan never told the full truth, not when it made him look bad. And I wanted to know why someone like him, who could charm his way out of almost anything, had finally pushed people too far. There was only one person I could think of who might give me a straight answer. Clara. She'd been renting a room in the same house Dylan had just been kicked out of, and if anyone had the full story, it was her. So, while Dylan slept like a rock, I pulled on my jacket and headed across town. Clara answered the door with a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and a raised eyebrow that told me she'd been expecting this visit. Her messy bun and oversized sweatpants were classic Clara. Unbothered, direct, and never one to sugarcoat anything. "You came to ask about Dylan, didn't you?" she said before I could even open my mouth. I gave a half shrug, trying to act casual. "He showed up at my place last night, said he got kicked out, but didn't bother telling me why." Clara snorted into her coffee, shaking her head. "Of course he didn't. He never admits to anything." "Well," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "then maybe you can tell me." She hesitated for a second, then sighed, stepping aside so I could come in. Her place smelled faintly of cinnamon, the way it always did. She flopped down onto her couch, curling one leg under her as she sipped her coffee. "Honestly, we were fed up," she said finally. "At first it was fine. Dylan was fun, easy to live with, always had energy. But that boy," she shook her head with a half laugh, "he just couldn't turn it off." I frowned. "Turn what off?" Clara looked me square in the eyes. "The need, the drive. He had to be with someone every day. And if he wasn't, he was restless, moody, pacing the halls like a caged lion. He'd bring people over constantly. Loud, chaotic. Girls, guys, it didn't matter to him. He needed the high, the release, and the rest of us, well, we needed sleep." She set her mug down with a thud, as if the memory still irritated her. "We told him to slow down, to be considerate. He'd nod, promise he would, and then 2 nights later the walls would be shaking again. After a while, we realized he wasn't going to change. So we told him to pack his stuff." I nodded slowly, pretending to look shocked. Inside, though, my chest burned with a strange warmth. Dylan always seemed wild, unpredictable, but I hadn't realized how deep it ran. To Clara and the others, his constant hunger for connection was exhausting. To me, it sounded like a door opening. "Every day?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound steady. Clara let out a humorless laugh. "Every day, sometimes more than once. It was like living with a storm that never passed." I pressed my lips together, trying not to let my thoughts show. To Clara, it was chaos. To me, it was confirmation of something I'd long suspected about Dylan. That beneath the swagger and grin was a restless heart searching for something he couldn't quite name. "Thanks for telling me," I said, pushing myself up from the couch. "I just wanted to understand." She waved her hand, already uninterested. "Good luck, Aaron. You'll need it if he's living with you now." On the walk back, my mind wouldn't settle. The cool air bit at my skin, but inside I was hot with thoughts I shouldn't have been thinking. Dylan's grin at the door, the way he'd sprawled across my couch like he owned it, the restless energy that seemed to hum in his bones. It all made sense now. He wasn't just restless. He wasn't just reckless. He needed closeness the way most people needed air. And while Clara saw that as a problem, I couldn't help but see it as possibility. When I slipped back into the apartment, Dylan was awake, sitting cross-legged on the couch with a bowl of cereal balanced in one hand. He looked up with a grin, milk clinging to the corner of his lip. "Morning, Rumi," he said, as if this had always been the arrangement. "You disappear on me?" "Had to run an errand," I said, hanging my jacket. He didn't press for details. Dylan never did unless it was something he wanted to know. He just went back to his cereal, tapping the spoon against the bowl. I studied him for a moment longer than I should have. The way his sweatshirt hung loose at the collar, the easy sprawl of his posture, the faint smirk that seemed permanently etched into his mouth. Clara's words echoed in my mind. Every day, I forced myself to look away, to grab my own mug from the kitchen, to act like nothing had changed. Because as far as Dylan knew, nothing had. He didn't know what Clara had told me. He didn't know that his secret, the thing that had cost him his home, now sat in my chest like a secret flame. For him, it was a burden. For me, it was a revelation. I sat down beside him, keeping my expression neutral, and asked something ordinary about the show on TV. He answered with his usual casual charm, grinning as though the world hadn't just shifted between us. But I knew, and I wasn't going to forget. Dylan made himself at home faster than I could blink. By the second day, my apartment didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like ours. His shoes ended up by the door in a messy heap, his backpack permanently parked beside the couch, and his laugh echoed off the walls so often that silence started to feel like the stranger. He had this way of sprawling wherever he sat, as if furniture existed purely for his comfort. The couch, especially, became his throne. By the third night, he was lounging shirtless, arms stretched wide across the backrest, chest bare and golden under the lamplight. He'd flip channels absent-mindedly with one hand, while the other held a soda can he never seemed to finish. I tried to act unfazed, like it was nothing, but my eyes betrayed me. They kept drifting, tracing the curve of his collarbone, the easy way his muscles flexed when he laughed at something stupid on TV. I forced myself to sip my drink, to pretend my pulse wasn't quickening just from sitting in the same room. "You're staring," Dylan teased one evening, not even looking away from the screen. I nearly choked. "I'm not. You are." He turned, smirk tugging at his lips. "What? Never seen someone this good-looking before?" I rolled my eyes, trying to brush it off. "You're not that special. Please," he said, throwing his head back with a laugh. "You'd kill to look like me." His confidence was infuriating and magnetic. I hated that it made me want to smile instead of punch him. The conversations drifted naturally into things he liked to brag about: nights out, parties, girls, hookups. I tried not to flinch when he talked so casually about things that, for me, were a hidden universe. One night, we were sitting on the couch, half watching a late-night movie neither of us cared about. Dylan was slouched low, legs stretched out, his bare foot brushing against my ankle now and then. He was telling me about a girl he'd been seeing, or maybe two. I couldn't keep up. Then he shrugged and said it like it was nothing. "I just need it every day. You know? That's just who I am." The words landed in me like a secret detonator. I gripped my soda can tighter, keeping my eyes on the screen, willing my heartbeat to slow. "Every day?" I asked, my tone carefully flat. "Yeah." He popped a handful of chips into his mouth, chewing casually as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb. "If I don't, I feel off, like I'm crawling out of my own skin. People think I'm crazy for it, but whatever. It's just how I'm wired." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to sound uninterested. "Sounds exhausting." He laughed, turning to face me fully now, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Exhausting for other people, maybe. Not for me. I've got energy to burn." I swallowed hard, nodding as if I agreed, as if my entire body wasn't humming with the knowledge of what Clara had told me. For his old roommates, Dylan's need had been chaos. For me, it was something else entirely, a temptation I didn't dare acknowledge aloud. The closeness between us grew in small, almost accidental ways. He'd nudge me with his knee when making a joke. Our thighs would touch on the couch, and neither of us would move away. Sometimes he'd lean in too close when showing me something on his phone, his shoulder brushing mine, his breath warm against my cheek. Each time, I reminded myself to stay calm, to keep my face neutral. To him, it was probably nothing, just his naturally tactile way of being. But to me, each brush of skin felt like a spark I couldn't ignore. One night, during some dumb comedy show, He burst out laughing and slapped my thigh like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. His hand lingered there just a second too long. "You're ridiculous," I said, trying to laugh it off, but my voice came out tighter than I intended. "What? It was funny," he shot back, grinning ear to ear. Then he leaned in closer, eyes narrowing playfully. "Why so tense, Aaron? You hiding something?" My breath caught. For a moment, I thought he could see right through me, that he knew exactly what I was thinking, what I wanted but couldn't admit. But then he just chuckled, leaned back, and stole another handful of chips. The moment passed, but the electricity lingered. At night, lying in bed, I replayed it all. The shirtless lounging, the careless confession about needing it every day, the casual touches that felt anything but casual to me. I told myself I was imagining things, that he wasn't interested, that he was just being Dylan. Unfiltered, unashamed, and unaware of the effect he had on me. And yet, some part of me wondered what would happen if I stopped pretending. Wondered if those accidental touches weren't so accidental after all. I stared at the ceiling, the muffled sound of Dylan's laugh drifting from the living room, and I realized something I hadn't before. He was more than just a roommate. He was a storm, loud and restless, crashing into the quiet life I'd built for myself. And no matter how dangerous it felt, I couldn't help but want to step right into it. Nights with Dylan had a way of stretching longer than they should. What started as one drink after dinner often turned into a string of conversations that carried us past midnight, sometimes until the first hint of dawn crept through the blinds. This particular night it was beer. 2 bottles, sweating with condensation on the coffee table between us. Dylan sat cross-legged on the couch, hair falling over his forehead, bare chest catching the glow of the muted TV. I was in the armchair, legs tucked up, trying to look comfortable even though every nerve felt too alive. We'd been talking about nothing in particular, music, old friends, the weirdest jobs we'd had, when Dylan suddenly grew quiet. He traced the rim of his bottle with his thumb, eyes down, jaw set in a way that didn't match the easy grin he usually wore. "You know what sucks?" he said finally. I tilted my head. "What?" He let out a long breath. "People always think I'm too much, too loud, too restless, too needy. Like I'm this walking problem they have to manage. Nobody actually sticks around long enough to get me. They just get tired and leave." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Dylan wasn't the type to show cracks. He was the guy who laughed off everything, who swaggered through life like nothing touched him. Hearing him admit to something raw, something vulnerable, tugged at me. "You're not too much," I said before I could stop myself. He barked a laugh, but it wasn't sharp, more hollow. "Come on, Aaron. You've heard the stories. You know why Clara and the others wanted me gone. I wear people out. I've heard it my whole life." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. My heart was beating harder than it should have been, but I forced my voice steady. "Maybe you've just been around the wrong people. Maybe they couldn't handle you, but that doesn't mean nobody can." That got his attention. His eyes lifted, meeting mine with a searching look. For a moment, I worried I'd said too much, that I'd betrayed the truth of how I really felt. But then his expression softened, and he gave a small, almost disbelieving smile. "You really think that?" I nodded. "I do." Something shifted then. The space between us didn't feel like just space anymore. It felt charged, alive. Dylan leaned back into the couch, but his gaze stayed on me, like he was trying to read something he couldn't quite make out. "Funny," he said, voice lower now. "You're the only one who's ever said that. Most people just laugh and say I need to calm down, or worse, they act like I'm some kind of burden." "You're not a burden," I said firmly. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was thick, meaningful. His eyes lingered on mine a little too long, and I felt the heat rise in my chest. We let the quiet stretch before Dylan broke it with a chuckle, shaking his head. "Man, listen to me. I sound pathetic." "You don't," I replied. "You sound honest." He smirked, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Guess the beer's working. Makes me talk too much." "You always talk too much," I teased gently. That got a real laugh out of him, loud and unrestrained, the kind of laugh that lit up the room. I found myself laughing too, even though the joke hadn't been that funny. It wasn't the words. It was the way he looked when he laughed, carefree and warm, as if for a second he believed he wasn't too much at all. The conversation wandered again. Old stories from high school, the kind of reckless things Dylan used to do just to get a reaction. I listened, smiling, shaking my head when he described sneaking into the football stadium at midnight just to climb the scoreboard. "You're insane," I said, grinning. He leaned forward, eyes glinting with mischief. "Admit it, you love hearing my stories." "Maybe," I conceded, my smile lingering longer than it should. He stood, stretching his arms over his head, body lean and effortless in its movements. "Thanks for listening, man. Don't think I've ever said that stuff out loud before." I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. "Anytime." He gave me a small smile, softer than his usual grin, more real. Then he padded off toward the couch he'd claimed as his bed. I lingered a moment longer, staring at the empty bottles, at the quiet room that now felt full of unspoken things. My chest ached with all the words I hadn't said, all the feelings I kept hidden. Finally, I turned out the light and went to my room. But even lying in the dark, I could still feel the weight of his eyes on mine, the warmth of that almost moment that had hung between us. And I knew it was only a matter of time before silence wouldn't be enough. The day started with Dylan in one of his restless moods. He paced the apartment with his phone glued to his hand, muttering under his breath. I'd gotten used to his energy, but this was sharper, more agitated, like he couldn't find anywhere to put it. By afternoon, he'd stormed out without a word. Hours passed. I told myself not to worry, that Dylan always found a way to land on his feet, but the silence in the apartment felt heavier than usual. When the door finally opened that evening, he looked different. His grin was gone. His shoulders slumped as he dropped his bag by the door. He didn't say a word, just walked straight to the couch and collapsed, burying his face in his hands. I set aside the book I wasn't really reading and moved closer. "Rough day." He let out a bitter laugh, muffled through his palms. "You could say that. What happened?" He lifted his head, and for once, there was no mask, no bravado, just raw frustration. "Interview this morning. Thought I had it in the bag. They basically laughed me out of the room." He rubbed his temples. "Said I didn't seem stable enough for the position." My chest tightened. "That's ridiculous. You're plenty capable." "Yeah, well, they didn't see it that way." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "And if that wasn't enough, ran into some old friends after. You know what they called me? A joke. Said I'd never figure my life out because I can't keep my head straight for more than 5 minutes." He laughed again, but it was sharp and humorless this time. "Guess they're not wrong." I shook my head. "They are wrong." He glanced at me, eyes bloodshot. "Come on, Aaron. Be honest. You know me. I mess things up. I burn through people, through jobs, through everything. Nobody sticks. Nobody ever does." The weight of his words sank deep. I could see the boy underneath the swagger, the one who never believed he was enough, the one who thought he was destined to be abandoned. I shifted closer, close enough that our knees touched on the couch. "That doesn't mean you're unwanted." He let out a shaky breath. "Feels that way." There was a pause, heavy and fragile. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, every nerve screaming at me to say what I'd kept buried. And before I could stop myself, the words slipped out. "Maybe you've just been looking in the wrong place." Dylan's head snapped toward me. His brows knit together, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I swallowed hard, wishing I could reel the words back in but knowing it was too late. "I mean, maybe the people you've been chasing weren't the right ones. Maybe the acceptance you're looking for isn't out there." His gaze lingered on me, sharp and searching. I could feel the air between us thicken, charged with something unsaid. "You're talking like you know," he said slowly, voice softer now. "Like you see something I don't." I forced myself to meet his eyes, even though it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. "Maybe I do." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Dylan's expression shifted. Confusion, curiosity, maybe even a hint of realization. He leaned forward slightly, his knee pressing more firmly against mine. "Aaron." His voice was low, uncertain. My chest tightened. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, but I stayed still. The silence stretched, filled with possibilities I wasn't sure either of us was ready for. Finally, he let out a sigh and leaned back again, running a hand through his hair. "You always know how to mess with my head." I gave a shaky laugh, trying to lighten the air that felt too heavy. "That's not my intention." "Well, you're doing it anyway." He smirked faintly, though it didn't hide the way his eyes lingered on me longer than usual. The night unfolded differently after that. We didn't return to the easy banter or casual jokes. Instead, the conversation stayed quieter, more deliberate. Dylan opened up in a way I'd never seen before, about his fear of being left behind, about the shame he carried over not being normal. "You know what it's like?" he asked, staring at his bottle of beer like it held answers. "It's like I'm this puzzle nobody wants to finish. They take one look, start putting the pieces together, and then give up halfway through. Too complicated, they say. Not worth the effort." I felt my throat tighten. "Maybe you just need someone who doesn't quit halfway." His eyes lifted again, meeting mine. That look, confused but curious, hesitant but open, cut straight through me. "Someone like you?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. My heart raced, my palms sweated, but I forced myself to nod, even if only slightly. Something flickered in his expression, something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't rejection, but it wasn't full understanding either. It was the look of someone trying to piece together a truth they'd never considered. He didn't push further. He just sat there, letting the silence speak for both of us. Eventually, he leaned back against the couch, closing his eyes. "You know, I don't get it. You've seen me at my worst. Why haven't you given up yet?" "Because I don't want to," I said softly. His lips parted slightly, like the answer surprised him. He opened his eyes and stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he gave a small, genuine smile, nothing like the cocky grins he used to hide behind. This one was soft, vulnerable, real. "You're weird, Aaron," he murmured. "Maybe," I admitted, "but maybe weird is what you need." We sat like that until the weight of the day pulled him down. He stretched out across the couch, resting his head against the armrest. I grabbed a blanket and draped it over him, and for once he didn't make a joke or protest. He just closed his eyes, a faint trace of that smile still lingering. I stood there a moment, watching him breathe, my chest aching with everything I wanted to say but couldn't. "Wrong place," I whispered to myself as I turned off the light. "Maybe someday you'll see it's been right here all along." The night started like so many others had. 2 beers open on the table, the low murmur of the TV in the background. Dylan sprawled on the couch with his usual careless ease. But something was different. He wasn't telling wild stories or cracking jokes tonight. He was quieter, thoughtful, his eyes darting toward me more often than usual. I could feel it too, the shift in the air between us. The silences weren't empty anymore. They were heavy, loaded with everything we hadn't said. He finally spoke, voice low and almost hesitant. "You know what I've been thinking about?" I glanced over, my heart picking up speed. "What?" He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking younger, uncertain. "You're the only one who doesn't treat me like a freak." The words hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened, and I set my beer down before I dropped it. "Dylan." He gave a little shrug, trying to play it off, but his eyes betrayed him. They were wide, searching, like he'd just confessed something he wasn't sure he should have. I swallowed, my throat dry. "You're not a freak. You're just you. And I don't think that's a bad thing." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Everyone else does." "Not me," I whispered. The quiet that followed stretched long. My pulse was a drum in my ears. I wanted to say more, to put words around the feelings that had been clawing at me for weeks, but my courage wavered. Instead, I did the one thing my body had been begging me to do. I leaned closer. It was slow, hesitant. My shoulder brushed his, and I searched his face for any sign to stop. His eyes flicked to mine, then down to my mouth, then back again. He didn't move away. I felt my breath catch as the space between us dissolved. My lips brushed his, barely a whisper of contact, and for a heartbeat the world froze. He didn't pull back. So I kissed him again, firmer this time, though my hands trembled where they gripped the couch cushion. Dylan froze at first, like his brain was trying to catch up with what was happening. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he kissed me back. His lips were warm, uncertain but curious, testing the waters. The kiss deepened by degrees, careful and unhurried, as if neither of us wanted to scare the other off. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear myself think. This was Dylan, reckless, restless Dylan, and yet here he was, kissing me with a gentleness I never imagined he had in him. When we finally pulled back, his eyes were wide, searching mine like he was trying to make sense of what just happened. His chest rose and fell quickly, his usual composure nowhere to be found. That, he swallowed hard, that felt different. I could barely breathe. Different how? He shook his head slowly, like he didn't have the words. I don't know. Just not like the others. Not like all the times before. I wanted to say something, anything, that would steady him, but my own hands were still shaking, my own thoughts spinning. All I could do was nod, hoping he could see the truth in my eyes. For the first time since I'd known him, Dylan looked unsure of himself. Not in the cocky, joking way he usually pretended to be, but truly unsure. Vulnerable. And yet, he hadn't rejected me. He hadn't pushed me away. If anything, he leaned just a little closer, as if some part of him wanted to feel it again but was too afraid to ask. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. The TV droned on, forgotten. My hand inched closer to his on the couch cushion, not quite touching but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. He finally broke the silence, voice hushed. You've really been holding that in, haven't you? I let out a shaky laugh. You have no idea. For a second, a smile tugged at his lips. But then it faltered, and he looked down, running a hand through his hair. This is new. I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything, I said softly. Just be here. He nodded, though his brows furrowed like he was still trying to solve a puzzle. When he looked back at me, there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just confusion, but curiosity. Maybe even wonder. Eventually, the weight of the moment eased. Dylan leaned back, exhaling deeply, and grabbed his beer like it was an anchor. I stayed close, close enough that our shoulders brushed, but I didn't push further. Couldn't. He took a long sip, then muttered under his breath. Different. I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't need to. The way he said it, the way he looked at me after, it was enough. We didn't kiss again that night, but we didn't move apart either. We sat shoulder to shoulder until the beers were gone, until the quiet became comfortable again. And though Dylan never said it outright, I knew. Something had shifted. The wall between us had cracked, and through it, light was finally starting to seep in. The days after our kiss stretched like an invisible thread between us. We didn't talk about it, not directly, but everything felt different. The way Dylan looked at me lingered longer. The way his laughter softened when it was just the two of us. The way the air grew charged in those quiet pauses. It was as if the apartment had shifted on its axis. Every movement carried weight. Every brush of skin sparked something I couldn't ignore. And yet, neither of us made the next move. Until one night, we were messing around on the couch. Some dumb game of tossing a pillow back and forth like kids. Dylan was grinning, eyes bright, hair falling into his face as he lunged forward to snatch it from me. I laughed, trying to hold it out of reach, but he was stronger, quicker. In one motion, he pulled the pillow away and caught my wrist, tugging me toward him. Our laughter died as I stumbled against his chest, suddenly pressed close. The grin faded from his lips, replaced by something deeper, something unguarded. His hand didn't let go of my wrist. Instead, it slid down to my forearm, holding me there gently, like he was afraid I'd pull away. But I couldn't. He searched my face for a long moment, and then, without a word, he leaned in. Our lips met again, this time not hesitant, not questioning, but certain. The kiss deepened quickly, his hand finding the side of my neck, fingers warm against my skin. My own hands, trembling but sure, slid over his shoulders. The heat between us grew, not frantic, but slow and deliberate, like both of us knew we had to savor it. We broke for air, foreheads resting together, breathing heavy. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but his voice was soft when he spoke. I can't stop thinking about you. Then don't, I whispered. The kisses returned, longer, hungrier, though still tender. He guided me back onto the couch, his body hovering above mine without pressure, giving me space even as his lips trailed along my jaw, my cheek, back to my mouth. Every touch was cautious at first, testing, like he was afraid of crossing some invisible line. But when I didn't flinch, when I welcomed him closer, he grew bolder. His hand skimmed down my chest, fingertips grazing the fabric of my shirt as if he was memorizing me. I'd imagined moments like this, but never like this, with Dylan, the boy who'd once been nothing more than chaos and noise in my life. Now he was careful, reverent, as though every part of me deserved to be known. The room seemed to shrink around us, the world outside falling silent until there was only the sound of our breathing, the gentle rhythm of hearts that had finally found the same beat. There was no rush, no frantic need to prove anything. What happened between us was not about conquest or release. It was about discovery, about learning the language of each other's touch, about finding safety in closeness neither of us had dared to ask for. His lips moved slowly against mine, breaking only to whisper words I'd never expected from him. You feel different, like this means something. It does, I said, my voice catching. At least to me. The look he gave me then was unlike any I'd ever seen on his face. Vulnerable, grateful, almost afraid. As we lay tangled together, time stretched out. His hand rested against my chest, feeling the rhythm of my heartbeat. Mine found his, gripping tightly as though afraid he'd vanish. We kissed again, softer this time, lips lingering without urgency. It wasn't about desire anymore. It was about closeness, about finally allowing ourselves to be seen. For once, Dylan wasn't restless. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't bouncing off the walls or reaching for a distraction. He was still, present. And when he finally spoke, it was almost a confession. I always thought I needed sex every day, he murmured, his forehead pressed to mine. Thought it was the only way to keep from going crazy. But maybe, he trailed off, swallowing hard. Maybe I just needed to feel wanted. My chest tightened, and I cupped his face gently, forcing him to meet my eyes. You are wanted, more than you realize. Something in him broke open then, not in a way that shattered, but in a way that healed. His lips trembled into a smile before he kissed me again. Slower, deeper, filled with meaning that words couldn't hold. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, wrapped in warmth and quiet certainty. The world outside could have burned and I wouldn't have noticed. For the first time since Dylan had walked into my apartment, I wasn't bracing for chaos. I wasn't worried about when he'd leave or when things would fall apart. All I felt was him. His breath against my skin, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the quiet honesty of a boy who'd finally realized he didn't have to be too much. He just had to be himself. And that was enough. When Dylan first showed up at my door, duffel bag in hand and bravado barely holding him together, I never imagined this would be the ending. Back then, he was noise and chaos and restless energy. I saw him as a storm, one I wasn't sure I could weather. But storms don't last forever. Sometimes they clear the air, leaving a sky you've never seen so blue. The change was gradual. At first, he'd still vanish on certain nights, chasing distractions the way he always had. I never asked where he went, though the ache in my chest told me I already knew. But slowly, those nights grew fewer. He'd linger on the couch instead, half watching whatever show I put on, stealing handfuls of popcorn until the bowl was empty. He started asking what I was cooking instead of rushing out the door. He started waiting for me to join him before opening a beer. One Friday evening, he tossed his phone onto the table with a groan. "Forget it," he muttered. "Not worth the effort." "What's not?" I asked. "Going out. The noise, the people. Feels empty." He looked at me then, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "This feels better." He meant the apartment. He meant me, and I felt it too. We slipped into a rhythm that felt alarmingly natural. Cooking together became an unspoken ritual. Dylan was hopeless with recipes but brilliant at improvising, throwing spices into the pan like a mad scientist. Half the time it worked. The other half, we laughed so hard at our disasters that we ended up ordering pizza instead. We built little inside jokes, the kind that made no sense to anyone but us. If he forgot to buy milk again, I'd shake my head and say, "Stable enough for the job, huh?" He'd grin, roll his eyes, and tackle me onto the couch until I surrendered in laughter. Evenings blurred into nights where we'd fall asleep side by side, sometimes on the couch with the TV still humming, sometimes in my bed when neither of us wanted the distance. I'd wake up to find him sprawled across half the mattress, arm heavy around me, breathing even and steady. And in those quiet mornings, sunlight pooling across the sheets, I realized how much peace I'd found in his presence. One night, as we were washing dishes shoulder to shoulder, he said it without warning. "You know, I thought I'd lost everything when I got kicked out." He rinsed a plate, set it in the rack, and glanced at me. "Turns out, I found where I belong." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him how much those words meant, how long I'd waited to hear them, but I knew sometimes silence was enough. I bumped my shoulder into his, and he bumped me back, smiling like he didn't need me to say anything. He already knew. It wasn't perfect. Dylan still had his restless days, still struggled with the fear that he'd mess it all up. There were moments when he'd retreat, eyes distant, muttering that I deserved better. But every time I pulled him back, sometimes with words, sometimes with nothing more than a steady hand at the back of his neck, grounding him. And every time he stayed. One rainy evening we were curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over us, when he spoke again. His voice was hushed, almost lost beneath the patter of rain on the windows. "You know what's crazy?" he asked. "What?" "I used to think I needed someone different every day, like I'd fall apart if I didn't keep moving, keep chasing." He shifted closer, his head resting against my shoulder. "But with you, it feels like I don't need to run anymore. You make me feel like enough, like I don't have to be more than I am." I kissed the top of his head, my voice barely a whisper. "You've always been enough." He exhaled slowly, his body relaxing into mine. Guess it just took me a while to believe it. The days blurred into weeks, the weeks into months. Our little apartment became more than four walls. It became a world where Dylan didn't have to perform, where I didn't have to hide. A world built on laughter, on shared meals, on the kind of quiet intimacy I never thought I'd find with him. We stopped keeping score of how we got here, how many nights of doubt, how many unspoken fears. What mattered was that we were here now, together. The last time he spoke of his old life, the roommates, the hookups, the endless cycle of noise, his voice held no longing, only disbelief. "I can't believe I ever thought that was living," he said, shaking his head. "It was just filling space. But this..." He gestured around our messy apartment, at the couch piled with blankets at me. "This is living." I smiled, heart swelling. "You sure you're not just saying that because I cook better than your old roommates?" He laughed, pulling me close. "Well, that too." But I knew he meant it. The night I knew for certain came quietly. We'd fallen asleep on the couch again, some movie long forgotten on the screen. I woke up in the middle of the night, the room dim, Dylan's arm draped over me. He stirred as I shifted, his voice groggy. "Still here?" he mumbled. "Still here," I whispered. He pulled me closer, his lips brushing the side of my neck before he slipped back into sleep. And in that moment I realized he wasn't running anymore. He'd found his anchor, and it was me. Looking back now, It amazes me how much changed. Dylan had walked into my life as a problem no one wanted to solve. A restless storm, all sharp edges and unchecked needs. But little by little, he became something else. He became my laughter on the hard days, my warmth on the cold nights, my love, my home. He thought he needed just anyone, every day. What he needed was me, and I'll never let him go.